The sound was so faint that Winston Brennan almost convinced himself he had imagined it. But then it came again, a rhythmic tapping, barely audible over the wind that whistled through the skeletal remains of the old mining town. He stood at the entrance of the Blackveen mine, a place that had been sealed off and abandoned for nearly a decade after a collapse killed 7 men and left the tunnels too dangerous to salvage. The wooden boards that once blocked the entrance hung askew, torn away by time and weather, and now that strange, deliberate tapping echoed from somewhere deep within the darkness. Winston pulled his worn coat tighter against the autumn chill and considered turning back. He had only come this far north because his merchant route had been diverted by early snowfall in the mountain passes, forcing him to take the old frontier road that skirted the abandoned settlements. But something about that sound, so purposeful, so measured, pulled at him. It was not the random drip of water or the settling of unstable rock. Someone, or something, was making that noise deliberately. He lit the oil lantern he always carried in his wagon for emergencies, the flame casting dancing shadows across the mine's gaping mouth. The tapping continued, steady as a heartbeat, and Winston found his feet carrying him forward before his mind could fully process the decision. The tunnel sloped downward, the walls close enough that he could touch both sides if he stretched out his arms. Support beams, rotted and sagging, lined the passage at irregular intervals, and more than once Winston had to duck beneath a partial collapse that had left rubble spilling across the floor. The deeper he went, the clearer the sound became. It was definitely intentional. 3 quick taps, then a pause, then 3 more, over and over again. A signal, he realized. Someone was calling for help. Winston quickened his pace, his lantern swinging wildly and sending shadows careening across the tunnel walls. He called out, his voice echoing strangely in the confined space, but received no answer except the continuation of that desperate tapping. The main tunnel branched into smaller shafts, but he followed the sound unerringly, taking a path that led deeper into the mountain's heart. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 20 minutes, Winston rounded a corner and found the source. A secondary collapse had sealed off a side chamber, leaving only a small gap near the ceiling where air could circulate. The tapping was coming from behind that wall of fallen rock and earth, and as Winston raised his lantern higher, he could see a hand large, green-skinned, with blunt nails caked in blood and dirt striking a stone against the rock face in that same rhythmic pattern. "Hello," Winston called, his voice cracking slightly. "Can you hear me?" The tapping stopped immediately. For a moment there was only silence, and then a voice, rough, feminine, and speaking in heavily accented human speech, responded. "You are real." I thought perhaps the dark had taken my mind at last." Winston moved closer, setting his lantern on a relatively stable outcropping of rock so he could examine the collapse more carefully. "How long have you been trapped down here?" 9 days. The answer came without hesitation, as though she had been counting every agonizing hour. "Perhaps 10. It is difficult to be certain without light. 9 days. Winston felt his stomach clench at the thought. 9 days in complete darkness, probably without food and with limited water if she was lucky enough to find seepage in the rock. "Are you injured?" "My leg is pinned beneath the rocks on this side. I cannot move it, but I have feeling in my toes, so I believe it is not crushed beyond repair." The greater danger is the hunger and the cold. Her calm assessment of her own dire situation struck Winston as either incredibly brave or a sign that she had moved beyond panic into a kind of resigned acceptance. He began examining the collapse more carefully, testing rocks to see which ones might be moved without bringing the whole thing down on both of them. "What is your name?" he asked, partly to keep her talking and partly because he realized he was potentially about to risk his life for someone he knew nothing about. There was a pause, longer than necessary for such a simple question. My name would sound strange to human ears. You may call me Kira. The phrasing struck Winston as odd, but he was too focused on the engineering problem before him to dwell on it. Several of the rocks near the top of the pile seemed less stable than the others, as though they had settled into position rather than being firmly wedged. If he could carefully remove those, he might be able to create an opening large enough for her to crawl through, assuming she could free her trapped leg. Kira, I am going to try to make an opening near the top of this collapse. When I do, I need you to be ready to pull yourself through quickly. Can you do that? If I can free my leg, yes. But you should know, she paused again, and Winston heard her take a shaky breath. You should know what I am before you commit to this rescue. I am orc-born. If you would rather leave me to my fate, I would understand. Winston's hands, which had been reaching for the first stone, froze in mid-air. An orc. He had never actually met one of the orc clans, though he had heard plenty of stories during his years traveling the frontier roads. Most of those stories painted orcs as brutal savages who raided human settlements, took what they wanted, and left destruction in their wake. Some of the older veterans he had shared campfires with claimed that orcs were incapable of mercy or kindness, that they were barely more than beasts in humanoid form. But those same stories claimed that orcs would never call for help, that they would rather die than show weakness to a human. And the voice coming from behind that wall of rock sounded nothing like a savage beast. She sounded frightened, exhausted, and resigned to death. What were you doing in an abandoned mine? Winston asked, his hands moving again as he carefully worked a loose stone free from the pile. Seeking shelter from a storm, I did not know the tunnels were unstable. Her voice grew quieter. I should not have wandered so far from clan lands. This death is my own foolishness. No one is dying today if I have anything to say about it, Winston said firmly, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. He managed to work the first large stone free, lowering it carefully to the ground rather than letting it tumble and risk triggering another collapse. I do not care what you are. 9 days in the dark is enough suffering for anyone. He heard a sound from the other side that might have been a sob or might have been a laugh. It was hard to tell. You are either very kind or very foolish human. My friends would tell you I am definitely more foolish than kind, Winston said, working on the next stone. But I prefer to think of it as being practical. If I leave you here, I will spend the rest of my life wondering if I could have saved you. That sort of guilt tends to keep a man awake at night, and I value my sleep highly. This time the sound was definitely a laugh, weak but genuine. What is your name, foolish practical human? Winston Brennan. I am a merchant by trade, currently lost and taking the scenic route back to civilization. He grunted with effort as he shifted a particularly heavy stone, his muscles protesting. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cold. Though I have to say, scenic might be generous. This part of the frontier is mostly just rocks and more rocks. I could have told you that before you risked your life coming down here, Kira said, and Winston thought he detected a hint of warmth in her voice now, as though talking to another living being after 9 days of solitude had rekindled something vital in her. Where is the fun in taking advice? Winston replied, managing to work another stone loose. The opening was growing larger, though still far too small for anyone to fit through. Besides, if I only did sensible things, my life would be incredibly boring. They fell into a rhythm, then Winston working methodically on the collapse, while Kira talked to him from the other side. She told him about how she had been tracking a deer that had wandered far from her clan's usual hunting grounds. how the storm had come up suddenly and viciously, how she had sought shelter in what she thought was a shallow cave, only to discover too late that it was actually a mine shaft. She had gone deeper looking for a place out of the wind, and that was when the collapse happened. "I thought I would die quickly," she admitted quietly, "either from the rocks crushing me or from lack of air, but there is a gap where water seeps through, so I had something to drink. And the air continued to flow, though I could not see where from. So instead of dying quickly, I have been dying slowly." "You are not dying at all," Winston corrected her, though his arms were beginning to tremble with fatigue. He had been working for over an hour, and the pile seemed barely smaller. "You are just having a very bad week. There is a difference. You have an interesting way of seeing the world, Winston Brennan. I find that life is generally less depressing if you maintain a sense of humor about it," he said, pausing to wipe sweat from his eyes. "Though I will admit, this particular situation is testing that philosophy somewhat." By the time Winston finally created an opening large enough for someone to potentially squeeze through, the flame in his lantern was burning low, and his hands were scraped raw. The gap was near the ceiling of the tunnel, roughly 5 feet off the ground and barely 2 feet across at its widest point. "Kira, I have an opening. How is your leg?" He heard sounds of movement, scraping and grunting, and then a pained gasp. "I have freed it. The rocks were not as firmly wedged as I thought. It hurts, but I believe I can stand." "Good. I am going to reach through and help pull you out, but you need to tell me if anything starts to shift or sound unstable on your side." "Understood." Winston climbed up onto the rock pile carefully, testing each foothold before committing his weight. When he reached the opening, he held his lantern up to peer through into the chamber beyond. What he saw made his breath catch. The space was small, barely 8 feet across, and littered with broken mining equipment from when the shaft had been in use. But what captured his attention was the figure struggling to her feet in the lamplight. Kira was tall, easily 6 feet, with broad shoulders and a powerful build that spoke of natural strength. Her skin was indeed green, a deep forest shade that almost seemed to absorb the lamplight. Dark hair, matted with dust and sweat, hung past her shoulders. Her clothing was torn and filthy, and her left leg was covered in blood from where she had been pinned. But it was her face that held Winston transfixed. She had the prominent lower canines that marked her as orc-born, small tusks that protruded past her upper lip, and her ears tapered to slight points. Her eyes, when they met his, were a startling amber color, bright and alert despite 9 days of suffering. She was not beautiful in the conventional human sense, but there was something arresting about her features, something that made it impossible to look away. "You see now what you are rescuing," Kira said quietly, and Winston heard the resignation creeping back into her voice. "If you wish to reconsider, put your arms through the opening," Winston interrupted. "We are wasting time, and my lantern will not last much longer." For a moment she just stared at him, as though trying to determine if he was serious. Then slowly she limped closer and raised her arms toward the gap. Winston set his lantern aside and reached through, grasping her forearms. Her skin was cold to the touch, rough with calluses but somehow also smooth. "On 3, he said. 1, 2, 3. He pulled with all his strength while Kira pushed with her good leg, trying to lever herself up and through the narrow opening. She was heavier than he expected, pure muscle, and for a terrifying moment, Winston thought they would not manage it, that she would fall back and he would lose his grip. But then her shoulders were through, and she was helping, using the rocks on his side for purchase. They collapsed together on the tunnel floor in a tangle of limbs, both breathing hard. Winston's muscles screamed in protest, and he could feel bruises already forming where the rocks had dug into his knees. But they had done it. She was out. "You are insane," Kira said between gasps for air. "Completely insane. That could have triggered another collapse." "But it did not," Winston pointed out, rolling onto his back and staring up at the tunnel ceiling. "So my insanity was clearly justified." He heard her laugh again, that same weak but genuine sound, and then suddenly she was crying. Not loudly, just quiet tears that she probably thought he could not hear in the darkness. Winston sat up slowly and retrieved his lantern, which was now flickering dangerously low. "Can you walk?" he asked gently. Kira wiped at her face with the back of her hand, leaving streaks in the dirt that covered her cheeks. "I can try." Winston helped her to her feet, letting her lean heavily on him. She was indeed tall. The top of his head barely reached her chin and solid as a tree. Her left leg could bear weight, but she flinched with each step. They would have to move slowly. The journey back through the mine tunnels was harrowing. The lantern died halfway through, plunging them into absolute darkness. Winston had to navigate by memory and touch, one hand on the wall and the other supporting Kira. She never complained, though he could hear her breathing grow ragged with pain. When they finally emerged into the gray afternoon light, both of them stood for a moment just breathing the fresh air, as though they could not quite believe they had made it. "My wagon is not far," Winston said. "I have supplies there: food, water, bandages. Can you make it a bit farther?" Kira nodded, though she looked ready to collapse. Winston got her moving again, half carrying her across the rocky ground toward where he had left his wagon tied near a stand of scrubby trees. When they finally reached it, he helped her into the back among the crates and barrels of trade goods, then quickly retrieved his water skin and the medical supplies he kept for emergencies on the road. Kira drank like someone who had been dying of thirst, which of course she had been. Winston had to physically take the water skin away from her before she made herself sick. "Slowly," he cautioned. "Your stomach needs time to adjust." While she sipped more carefully, Winston examined her injured leg. The rocks had abraded the skin badly and left deep purple bruising, but miraculously nothing appeared to be broken. He cleaned the wounds as best he could with what supplies he had and bound them with clean bandages. "You need a proper healer," he said, sitting back on his heels. "And food, real food. There is a settlement about 2 days' travel south of here, Millbrook. Small place, but they have an inn and a healer." Kira's eyes widened. "You cannot take me to a human town. They would," she stopped, her jaw clenching. "It would not be safe for either of us." Winston had not thought of that, but he realized she was right. Rolling into town with an orc in his wagon would likely cause panic at best and violence at worst. The frontier towns had an uneasy relationship with the orc clans. There was an official treaty, but it was maintained more through mutual avoidance than actual peace. "Then what do you suggest?" he asked. "You cannot walk on that leg, not the distance back to your clan lands, and winter is coming. You need shelter and time to heal." Kira stared at him for a long moment, those amber eyes searching his face as though trying to read his intentions. "There is an old trapper's cabin about a day's travel west of here, near the base of the Gray Ridge. It has been abandoned for years, but it should still be standing. If you could take me there, I could recover enough to make my own way home." It was not a perfect solution, but it was better than the alternatives. Winston nodded. "West it is, then. But first, you need to eat something." He rummaged through his supplies and found some dried meat, hard bread, and a precious apple he had been saving for himself. Kira ate with the same desperate intensity with which she had drunk, and Winston had to remind her again to slow down. When she finally finished, she slumped back against the wagon's side, exhaustion overtaking her now that the immediate crisis had passed. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I know what you risked to help me. If my clan knew that a human had saved my life, they would," she shook her head. "It would complicate things, but I am grateful, Winston Brennan. I owe you a debt I can likely never repay." "You do not owe me anything," Winston said, climbing up onto the wagon seat and taking the reins. "Any decent person would have done the same." "No," Kira said firmly. "Most would not have. Most humans would have left me there or worse. You are unusual." Winston did not know how to respond to that, so he simply clicked his tongue to get the horses moving. As the wagon lurched into motion, heading west toward the gray ridge, he found himself wondering what exactly he had gotten himself into. Saving Kira from the mine had been instinct, the right thing to do in the moment. But now, he was traveling into unfamiliar territory with an injured orc, planning to hole up in an abandoned cabin for who knew how long while she recovered. His merchant route was already disrupted. The goods he carried were not particularly time-sensitive, but every day he delayed was a day of lost profit. And yet, when he glanced back and saw Kira's exhausted face, saw the way she cradled her injured leg and fought to keep her eyes open, he knew he could not have made any other choice. They traveled in silence as the afternoon wore into evening. Winston kept to game trails and avoided the main roads, not wanting to risk encountering other travelers who might notice his unusual passenger. Kira dozed fitfully in the back, occasionally waking with a start and looking around as though she expected to find herself back in the darkness of the mine. When night fell, Winston made camp in a small clearing sheltered by a rock formation. He helped Kira down from the wagon and settled her near the fire he built, then prepared a proper meal from his provisions, a stew made with dried vegetables and salted meat that was far better than the meager rations she had eaten earlier. Kira ate more slowly this time, savoring each bite. In the firelight, with some of the dirt and dust washed from her face, Winston could see her features more clearly. She was younger than he had initially thought, probably close to his own age of 25, though it was hard to judge with orcs. Her amber eyes reflected the flames, giving them an almost hypnotic quality. "Tell me about your clan," Winston said, partly out of genuine curiosity and partly to fill the silence. Kira looked up from her bowl, surprised by the question. "Why do you wish to know?" "Because I just spent hours pulling you out of a collapsed mine shaft, and I realized I know almost nothing about you except that you are stubborn and terrible at checking caves for structural integrity." That earned him a small smile, the first real one he had seen from her. It transformed her face, making her look less like the suffering prisoner from the mine and more like someone who had once known how to laugh freely. "My clan is called the Stone Wolves," she began slowly. "We hold territory in the northern mountains, where the pine forests grow thick and the winters are harsh. We are hunters and warriors, and we keep to ourselves mostly. The treaty with the human settlements was made before I was born, after a war that neither side truly won. Now we stay on our lands, humans stay on theirs, and we pretend the other does not exist." "But you left clan lands," Winston observed, "hunting a deer." "Yes, which was foolish, as I already admitted." She stared into the fire. "But I was one of the best hunters in my clan. I have tracked prey through blizzards and brought down elk single-handedly. I grew arrogant, thinking I could handle anything. The storm proved me wrong. The mine proved me wrong. And now," she gestured at her bandaged leg, "now I will return home weakened and having learned humility the hard way." There was something in her voice, a hint of deeper worry, that made Winston think there was more to the story than she was saying. But he did not press. Instead, He told her about his own life growing up in a small farming community far to the south, learning the merchant trade from his father, eventually striking out on his own to travel the frontier routes where profit margins were higher but risks were greater. "It is a lonely life sometimes," he admitted, "but I like the freedom of it. No one telling me where to go or what to do, just me, my wagon, and the road." "I understand that," Kira said. "The longing for freedom, to move through the world on your own terms." She paused. "Though I imagine there are fewer people trying to kill you simply for existing." The bitter observation hung in the air between them. Winston wanted to argue to say that it was not that bad, but he knew it would be a lie. He had heard the stories, seen the way frontier towns posted guards specifically to watch for orc raiding parties, even though such raids had become increasingly rare since the treaty. Fear and prejudice ran deep on both sides. "For what it is worth," Winston said finally, "I am glad I followed that tapping sound into the mine. The world would be poorer without you in it." Kira stared at him, her expression unreadable. "You say strange things, Winston Brennan." "So I have been told." They maintained watches through the night. Winston insisted, despite Kira's protests, that she was the one who should be standing guard given her warrior training. But her injured leg made that impractical, so they compromised by splitting the duty. When Winston took the second watch and Kira finally allowed herself to sleep, he found himself studying her face in the firelight. She looked different when relaxed, younger, more vulnerable. He could see the small scars that marked her green skin, evidence of a hard life spent hunting and fighting. Her hands, even in sleep, remained slightly curled as though ready to grab a weapon at a moment's notice. Winston wondered what it must be like to live always on guard, always ready for conflict. He also found himself noticing things he probably should not have been noticing: the elegant line of her jaw, the way her dark hair fell across her shoulders, the surprising grace of her even in injury. He shook his head, banishing such thoughts. She was injured, traumatized, and depending on him for help. Noticing anything beyond that would be inappropriate at best and predatory at worst. Still, as dawn broke and he gently woke Kira to eat breakfast and continue their journey, Winston could not quite shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted inside him during the long night. He had helped people before in his travels, shared food with hungry travelers, given rides to those stranded on the road, even fought off bandits threatening other merchants. But this felt different somehow, more personal, more consequential. The cabin that Kira had mentioned turned out to be exactly where she said it would be, nestled in a small valley at the base of the Gray Ridge. It was a simple structure, built from local timber with a stone chimney and a roof that had seen better days but still appeared mostly intact. The door hung slightly crooked on its hinges, and one of the two windows had been boarded over, but overall it was sound enough. Winston helped Kira inside while she leaned heavily on him, her injured leg clearly causing her significant pain after a day of travel. The interior was dusty and filled with the detritus of years of abandonment. Old traps hung on the walls, a rickety table and chair sat near the fireplace, and a simple bed frame occupied one corner, though its mattress had long since been claimed by mice. "It is not much," Kira said apologetically. "It is shelter and it is private," Winston replied. "That is all we need." He spent the rest of the day making the place habitable. He cleaned out the fireplace and got a proper fire going, drove away the mice and swept out years of accumulated dirt and leaves, and brought in supplies from his wagon. He even rigged a makeshift mattress using blankets and his own bedroll on the old frame, insisting that Kira take it while her leg healed. "Where will you sleep?" she asked, watching him work with an expression that seemed caught between gratitude and guilt. "I have slept in my wagon often enough." A few more nights will not kill me. He saw her about to protest and held up a hand. You are injured. You spent 9 days trapped in a mine, and you need actual rest to recover. Do not argue with me on this. Kira closed her mouth, but her eyes tracked him as he moved around the cabin, and Winston got the sense that she was not accustomed to anyone taking care of her. He wondered about her life in the clan, about what it meant to be an orc woman warrior. Did they have families? Friends? People who worried about them when they were late returning from a hunt? As if reading his thoughts, Kira spoke up. My clan will think I am dead by now. It has been too long. They will have searched for a few days and then given up. Will they? Winston hesitated. Will they mourn you? Some will. My mother will. She is the clan's healer and has always been softer-hearted than most. My sister will be angry that I died stupidly, but she will grieve in her own way. Kira's voice grew quieter. There was someone else who might have mourned, but that is complicated. Winston wanted to ask what she meant, but sensed that pushing would be unwelcome. Instead, he finished his preparations and made dinner another stew, supplemented with some wild onions he had found growing near the cabin. They ate in companionable silence, the warmth of the fire driving away the evening chill. Over the following days, a routine developed. Winston would hunt or forage in the mornings, keeping them supplied with fresh meat and edible plants to supplement his trade goods. He tended to Kira's injuries, changing her bandages and making poultices from herbs he found growing in the valley. Slowly, her leg began to heal, the swelling going down and the wounds closing. In the afternoons, they would talk. Winston learned more about orc culture than he had ever thought possible, their complex clan hierarchies. Their spiritual beliefs centered around honoring ancestors and respecting the natural world, their traditions of craftsmanship and storytelling. Kira was an excellent storyteller, bringing to life hunts through winter storms and battles against rival clans that tested her people's strength and cleverness. In turn, Winston told her about the wider human world, the cities she had only heard about in legends, the complex trade networks that connected distant regions, the political maneuverings of nobles and merchants. Kira listened with fascination, asking questions that revealed a sharp intelligence and genuine curiosity. It sounds exhausting, she commented one evening. All that scheming and status-seeking. In the clans, your worth is simpler to measure. Can you hunt? Can you fight? Can you contribute to the clan's survival? Everything else is secondary. It has its appeal, Winston admitted, though I imagine it has its own complications. What if someone is a poor hunter but excels at something else? Then they find another way to contribute. My mother is not a warrior, but no one questions her value because her healing skills have saved countless lives. My uncle is too old to hunt effectively now, but he makes the finest arrows in the clan and teaches the young ones. There is always a place for those who wish to serve the clan's good. She paused. Unless, of course, you bring shame upon yourself and the clan, then things become much more difficult. The way she said it, flat and matter-of-fact, made Winston wonder if she was speaking from experience. But before he could ask, she changed the subject to asking about human marriage customs, which led to a long and occasionally hilarious discussion about the differences between orc and human courtship rituals. Let me understand this correctly, Kira said, her eyes bright with amusement. Human men give flowers to women they wish to court, just flowers, not proof of hunting prowess or demonstrations of strength. Well, sometimes they do other things too, Winston protested, laughing. But yes, flowers are traditional. They are supposed to be romantic. What possible use are flowers? They die within days. At least if an orc brings his intended the pelt of a great beast, she can wear it or trade it. Flowers are just, she gestured helplessly, dying plants. I suppose when you put it that way, it does sound rather impractical, Winston conceded. But humans value the gesture, the thought behind the gift. Flowers are beautiful but temporary, like the excitement of new love, or something like that. I confess courtship has never been my strong suit. No, Kira tilted her head, studying him. Why not? You are not unpleasant to look at. You have a trade that keeps you fed, and you are kind enough to rescue dying orcs from collapsed mines. These seem like desirable qualities. Winston felt his face heat. Yes, well, my lifestyle does not lend itself to romance. I am always traveling, never staying in one place long enough to properly court anyone. And the women in the settlements I trade with are usually looking for men who will stay put, help raise families, build stable lives. That is not me. So you choose freedom over companionship, Kira said thoughtfully. I understand that choice. It is similar to the path I've taken. What do you mean? She was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. In orc clans, women of marriageable age are expected to choose a mate and begin producing children to strengthen the clan. I am past the age when most make that choice, and I have refused all offers. I prefer hunting to child rearing, prefer my independence to being tied to a mate and hearth. This makes me, she struggled to find the right word, unusual, suspect. Some in the clan whisper that I am selfish, that I shirk my duty. But you said there was someone who might have mourned you, someone you mentioned before. Kira's jaw tightened. Dravik. He is the clan chief's son and has been persistent in his courtship. He is strong, skilled, everything an orc woman should want. But I do not want him. I have refused him multiple times, which has caused tension. His father sees my refusal as an insult to their family. Others see it as evidence of my unnatural nature. She looked at Winston directly. That deer I was hunting, the one that led me so far from clan lands, part of why I followed it was because I needed space to think, to escape the pressure for a while, and look where that got me. Winston understood then why returning home was complicated for her. She would be returning not just injured but having failed spectacularly, which would likely embolden her critics and make Dravik's father more insistent that she accept his son's courtship to prove her loyalty to the clan. For what it is worth, Winston said carefully, I think choosing your own path takes more courage than simply doing what is expected of you. Kira looked at him with an expression of such profound gratitude that it made Winston's chest ache. Thank you for saying that. Even if you are the only one who believes it. I believe it, Winston said firmly. And you should believe it too. The days blended into weeks. Autumn deepened, the trees in the valley turning brilliant shades of gold and crimson before losing their leaves entirely. Winston knew he should be moving on. Winter would close the mountain passes soon, and he needed to complete his trading route before snow made travel impossible. But Kira's leg, while healing, was not yet strong enough for her to make the journey back to clan lands on her own. And Winston found that he was in no hurry to leave. They had settled into an easy companionship that surprised him. Kira's initial wariness had faded, replaced by a dry wit and unexpected gentleness that contrasted beautifully with her warrior's strength. She taught him how to track game more effectively, reading signs in the forest that he would have missed. He taught her about the medicinal properties of various plants, knowledge he had picked up from healers during his travels. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire and talk until the flames burned low. Sometimes the conversations were deep about meaning and purpose and what made a life worth living. Other times they were light, trading jokes and stories that had them both laughing until their sides hurt. Winston learned that Kira had a surprisingly loud laugh when something truly amused her, a full-bodied sound that seemed to come from deep in her chest. He also learned that she was afraid of spiders, which he discovered when she shrieked upon finding a large one in the cabin's corner. For a fearsome orc warrior who could track and kill a deer single-handedly, her terror of the tiny arachnid was both unexpected and endearing. "Do not laugh at me," she grumbled as Winston dealt with the spider, carefully relocating it outside. "They are unnatural creatures with too many legs." "I am not laughing," Winston lied, clearly laughing. "You are a terrible liar, Winston Brennan." It was on a cool evening in late autumn, nearly a month after he had pulled her from the mine, that things shifted between them. Kira had been practicing walking without support, building strength in her healing leg. Winston was preparing dinner when she suddenly stumbled, her leg giving out. He lunged forward without thinking, catching her before she could fall. For a moment they stood frozen, Winston's arms wrapped around her waist, Kira's hands gripping his shoulders for balance. They were close enough that he could feel the warmth of her breath, could count the faint freckles that dotted her green skin. Her amber eyes were wide, her lips slightly parted in surprise. "Thank you," she whispered, but neither of them moved. Winston knew he should step back, should release her and restore the appropriate distance. But his body refused to obey. Instead, his hands tightened slightly on her waist, and he found himself leaning incrementally closer. Kira's eyes darkened, her pupils dilating, and she did not pull away. The kiss, when it happened, was soft and tentative, a question more than a statement. Kira's lips were warm and slightly rough, and she tasted of the wild mint tea they had been drinking. For a handful of heartbeats, Winston forgot to breathe, forgot to think, forgot everything except the perfect rightness of this moment. Then reality crashed back, and they broke apart simultaneously. Kira stumbled backward, nearly falling again before catching herself against the table. Winston stood paralyzed, his heart hammering so hard he could hear it in his ears. "I should not have." They both started simultaneously, then stopped. "That was inappropriate," Winston said, forcing the words out. "You are injured and dependent on my help." "I should not have taken advantage." "You did not take advantage," Kira interrupted. She seemed to be struggling with something, her hands clenching into fists. "I wanted that, have wanted that, but it is impossible." "Why?" "Because I am orc and you are human. Because my clan would cast me out if they knew I had kissed a human. Because your people would call you a monster lover and worse. Because you have your life on the road and I have my duty to my clan, however complicated that duty may be. Because—" her voice cracked. "Because wanting something does not make it possible." Winston wanted to argue, to say that none of those obstacles mattered, but he knew she was right. The gulf between their worlds was too wide. A single kiss might be forgivable as a moment of weakness, but anything more would have consequences neither of them could escape. "I am sorry," he said quietly. "I should not have put you in that position." Kira laughed, but it was a bitter sound. "Stop apologizing for the only thing in weeks that has made me feel alive instead of simply surviving." She limped over to the chair and sat down heavily. "Let us eat our dinner and pretend this did not happen. It is the only sensible course of action." But pretending it had not happened proved impossible. The awareness between them had shifted, become charged with something electric and dangerous. Winston found his eyes drawn to Kira, constantly the elegant movement of her hands, as she worked on repairing one of her torn pieces of clothing. The way firelight played across her green skin, the rare smile that transformed her entire face. And he caught her watching him too, her amber eyes tracking his movements with an intensity that made his skin prickle with heat. The small cabin suddenly felt even smaller, the air between them thick with everything they were not saying. 3 days after the kiss, unable to bear the tension any longer, Winston brought it up again. They were outside, Winston chopping wood for the fire while Kira practiced her walking, trying to build up her endurance. "Kira, we need to talk about what happened." She paused mid-step, her back going rigid. "I thought we agreed to pretend it did not happen." "I cannot pretend," Winston said, setting down the axe. "I cannot stop thinking about it, about you." Kira turned slowly, her expression guarded. "What do you want me to say, Winston?" "That I think about it too. That I lie awake in that bed. You insisted I take and imagine what it would be like if things were different." She shook her head. "Admitting these things changes nothing. The barriers between us remain." "What if they do not have to?" Winston took a step toward her. "What if we chose to ignore them? And then what? I return to my clan with the knowledge that I have betrayed everything they are by loving a human. You travel to human settlements with an orc companion who people will assume is your slave or your prisoner." Kira's voice rose. "There is no world where this works, Winston. No future where we both get to keep the lives we have built." "Maybe those lives are not as important as we think they are," Winston said. "Maybe there are more important things." Kira stared at him for a long moment, and he saw her expression cycle through anger, hope, fear, and finally settle on a kind of desperate longing that matched what he felt in his own chest. "You are asking me to choose between you and my clan, my family, everything I have ever known." "No," Winston said firmly. "I would never ask that of you, but I am saying that the choice exists, and that if you wanted to make it, if you wanted to try to find a path where we could be together, I would be beside you every step of the way." "Why?" Kira's voice broke. "Why would you give up your freedom, your trade, your whole life for someone you have known only a few weeks? It makes no sense." "Because in those few weeks, I have been happier than in all the years before them," Winston said simply. "Because you are brilliant and brave and funny and kind. Because you challenge me and surprise me and make me want to be better than I am. Because when I imagine driving away and never seeing you again, it feels like losing a part of myself I did not even know existed until you." Tears were streaming down Kira's face now, cutting tracks through the dust on her cheeks. "I am terrified," she whispered, "of wanting this, of choosing wrong, of hurting you or my family or both." Winston closed the distance between them and carefully, giving her every opportunity to pull away, cupped her face in his hands. "Being terrified is not a reason not to try. Sometimes the best things in life are the ones that scare us most." This kiss was different from the first. Where that one had been tentative and questioning, this was decisive and hungry. Kira's arms came up around his neck, pulling him closer despite their height difference. Winston felt like he was falling and flying simultaneously, every nerve ending alight with sensation. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kira rested her forehead against his. "If we do this, if we try to make this work, it will not be easy. We will face hatred from both our peoples. There will be no easy place for us in this world. Then we will make our own place," Winston said. "Together." Kira pulled back enough to meet his eyes, searching his face for any sign of doubt or hesitation. Whatever she found there must have satisfied her, because she nodded slowly. "Together," she repeated, as though testing the word's weight. The following days brought both joy and planning. They talked seriously about what choosing each other would mean practically. Kira could not return to her clan, not if she was going to openly acknowledge a relationship with a human. The betrayal would be seen as unforgivable, and at best, she would be cast out. At worst, they might try to kill Winston for corrupting her. Winston's situation was more flexible. He had no family depending on him, no permanent ties to any settlement. But traveling the frontier with an orc companion would be dangerous. Some towns would refuse them entry entirely. Others might react with violence. His trade routes would need to change. focusing on more remote areas where prejudice was less entrenched, or where the residents were too desperate for goods to care about the merchant's companion. We could head farther west, Winston suggested one evening, studying the rough map he kept among his supplies. Beyond the frontier, into the territories that have not been fully settled yet. There are scattered homesteads out there, people who left civilization behind for their own reasons. They might be more accepting, or more dangerous, Kira pointed out. The Western territories have no laws, no protections. We would be entirely on our own. We are going to be on our own regardless, Winston said. At least out there, we would have space to build something without constant interference. Kira traced a finger along the map, following the mountain ranges westward. There are orc clans in the far west too, different from the stone wolves, less bound by tradition. Some of them trade with human settlements, or so I have heard. Perhaps we could find a place that bridges both our worlds. Perhaps, Winston agreed. He reached out and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. Her hand was large enough to engulf his, calloused from years of hard work and absolutely perfect. Whatever we do, wherever we go, I want you to know that I do not regret this, any of this. Not even being trapped in a cabin with an injured orc for weeks while your trading route goes to ruin. Kira asked, but she was smiling. Especially not that, Winston said firmly and kissed her to prove it. As Kira's leg fully healed and she regained her strength, they began preparing for departure. Winter was coming in earnest now. They could see snow on the higher peaks, and frost covered the ground each morning. They needed to move soon, before the weather made travel impossible. Winston reorganized his wagon, making space for Kira, and rearranging his trade goods to maximize value while minimizing weight. Some things would have to be left behind. He could not carry both a full merchant's load and the supplies they would need for an uncertain journey into the Western territories. Kira contributed what she could, fashioning better tools from materials they found around the cabin. Her craftsmanship was impressive. She made a knife from an old piece of metal scrap that held an edge better than anything Winston had previously owned. She also repaired her torn clothing and made warmer garments from spare fabric in Winston's supplies and animal pelts from his hunts. "We need to discuss what happens if we encounter my clan," Kira said one morning while they packed. "It is unlikely but possible. If they are out hunting or patrolling clan borders, what would you want to do?" Winston asked. "I do not know," she admitted. "Part of me wants to tell them that I am alive, to relieve my mother's grief. But doing so would reveal where I have been and with whom, and if Dravik or his father are present," she shook her head, "it could turn violent quickly." "Then we avoid them if possible," Winston said. "Your safety comes first." "Our safety," Kira corrected. "I will not let you martyr yourself for me." "Noted." Winston smiled. "Though I reserve the right to do moderately foolish things to keep you safe, it seems to be my specialty." The morning they left the cabin was bitterly cold, the sky gray with the promise of snow. Winston hitched his horses and did a final check of the wagon while Kira stood at the cabin's entrance, looking back at the small structure that had sheltered them both. "Strange," she said quietly. "I was so eager to escape this place when we first arrived. Now leaving it feels like leaving something important behind," Winston finished. "I feel it too. This place gave us time to figure out what we wanted, to figure out each other." Kira nodded, then turned and climbed up onto the wagon seat beside him. It was a statement, sitting openly at his side rather than hiding in the back among the cargo. Anyone who saw them would immediately know they were traveling together, would draw their own conclusions. "Are you ready?" Winston asked, taking up the reins. Kira reached over and took his hand, squeezing tightly. "No, but I think perhaps the best decisions are the ones we make before we are ready." Winston clicked his tongue and the horses began to move. As they left the valley and headed west toward the unknown, he felt something loosen in his chest, fear mixing with excitement, anxiety tempering hope. The future was utterly uncertain, potentially dangerous and completely unplanned. It was also, Winston realized, exactly what he wanted. They traveled for 3 days without incident, keeping to game trails and avoiding the main roads. The landscape gradually shifted as they moved west. The forests became denser, the mountains more rugged, and signs of human habitation grew increasingly sparse. They saw deer and elk, once a bear in the distance, but no people. On the 4th day that changed. They were following a narrow track along a ridgeline when Kira suddenly tensed beside him. "Stop the wagon," she said urgently. Winston pulled the horses to a halt. "What is wrong?" "There are orcs nearby. I can smell them. My people have a distinctive scent that humans cannot detect." She closed her eyes, concentrating. "At least 3, maybe more. They are upwind, which means they likely have not detected us yet. Can you tell if they are from your clan?" "No. But in these territories it is likely." Kira's hand moved to the knife at her belt. "We should leave the trail, take cover in the forest." But before they could move, a voice called out from the trees ahead. "Kira! Kira of the Stone Wolves!" Winston saw Kira's face go pale. "That is my sister's voice. Brenna." 3 orcs emerged from the tree line, all female, all armed. The one in front was slightly taller than Kira, with the same green skin and amber eyes but with her dark hair cut short. She stared at Kira with an expression of utter shock. "You are alive," Brenna said, her voice barely above a whisper. "How we searched for days. We found signs of the storm, traces of your trail, but then nothing. Mother said prayers for your spirit. We believed you dead." Kira climbed down from the wagon slowly, favoring her still healing leg. "I nearly was. There was a mine collapse. I was trapped for 9 days before." She gestured back at Winston. "Before he found me and pulled me out." All 3 orc women's eyes focused on Winston, who remained on the wagon seat, trying to appear as non-threatening as possible while acutely aware that he was a lone human, and completely outmatched if this turned hostile. "A human saved you," Brenna said flatly. "And now you travel with him openly, sitting at his side like—" She stopped, understanding dawning on her face. "Kira, no, tell me you have not been so foolish." "Watch your tongue, Brenna," Kira said, her voice hard. "Winston Brennan saved my life and asked nothing in return. He cared for me while I healed, kept me safe, and treated me with more honor than many in our own clan have shown. And in return you betray every law and tradition of our people." One of the other orcs stepped forward, her hand on her weapon. "You shame yourself and your family." "I choose my own path," Kira said firmly, "as I have always done." Brenna moved closer to her sister, lowering her voice though Winston could still hear. "Kira, think about what you are doing. If you come home now, we can say you were injured, confused." "The clan will forgive. I am not confused," Kira interrupted. "And I am not coming home. Not to a clan that would demand I give up the person She stopped, taking a breath. "I am going west, Brenna, to find a place where Winston and I can build a life together. A place where what we are to each other matters more than what others think we should be." Brenna's face cycled through a dozen emotions: shock, anger, grief, and finally a kind of resigned sadness. "Mother will be heartbroken. Not just that you are alive but choosing to leave, but that you are." She glanced at Winston again. "How can you love a human, Kira? They are so fragile, so short-lived. And he will never truly understand you, never know what it means to be one of the Stone Wolves." "Perhaps not," Kira acknowledged. "But he sees me, Brenna. not just as a hunter or a warrior or a potential mate to strengthen the clan. He sees me, all of me, and he chose me anyway. Can you say Dravik or anyone else in the clan offers the same? Brenna flinched at the mention of Dravik's name. Dravik will be furious when he learns you are alive and have chosen a human over him. His father will demand action from the clan council. Then let them demand, Kira said. I am leaving Stone Wolf territory, leaving the clan's protection and its obligations. What I do beyond the borders is my own business. It does not work that way, and you know it, the third orc spoke up. You cannot simply walk away from the clan. Once Stone Wolf, always Stone Wolf. Your actions reflect on all of us. Then cast me out officially, Kira said. I will not fight it. Declare me dead, declare me exiled, declare me whatever you need to, but I am not coming back. Brenna studied her sister's face for a long moment, then looked at Winston again. This time her gaze was more assessing, less hostile. Human, she called out. Do you love my sister? Winston climbed down from the wagon, his legs shaky but his voice steady. Yes, more than I have ever loved anything in my life. And you understand what you are asking of her, what she is giving up to be with you. I do, and I will spend every day trying to be worthy of that sacrifice. Brenna nodded slowly. Then I will not stop you. I will return to the clan and tell them that I found evidence of Kira's death, that the mine collapse claimed her. It will be a mercy to Mother to know her daughter did not suffer long. She looked back at Kira. But you can never come back. Never. If you return, if you are seen in Stone Wolf territory again, I cannot protect you. Do you understand? Kira's eyes were bright with unshed tears. I understand, and Brenna, thank you for this kindness. It is not kindness, it is love. Brenna stepped forward and pulled Kira into a fierce hug. Be happy, little sister. Be safe. And if this human ever mistreats you, send word and I will hunt him to the ends of the earth. He would not, Kira said, but she was smiling through her tears. The 3 Stone Wolf orcs melted back into the forest as silently as they had appeared. Kira stood for a long moment staring after them, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Winston approached carefully and put his arms around her from behind, letting her lean into him. I am sorry, he said quietly. I know that cost you. No more than staying would have, Kira said. She turned in his arms and kissed him fiercely. Let us go. Let us find that place where we can just be ourselves. They traveled for 2 more weeks, pushing west into territories that appeared on Winston's map only as blank spaces marked unsettled. The terrain grew more challenging, mountain passes that had the wagon tilting dangerously. Forests so thick they sometimes had to backtrack and find alternative routes, rivers that required careful planning to ford safely. But they also discovered a kind of freedom in the isolation. Days would pass without seeing another soul. They could travel openly together, touch freely, laugh without worrying who might overhear. At night they would make camp, and Kira would tell Winston stories of orc legends while he held her close. They were building their own world, 1 mile at a time. It was during the 3rd week that they found the settlement. It was not marked on any map, just a collection of perhaps 20 buildings clustered around a wide valley where a river ran clear and cold. As they approached cautiously, they could see the inhabitants moving about their business, and Winston's breath caught when he realized the settlement was mixed. Humans and orcs living side by side, working together to repair a barn roof, trading goods in what looked like a small market square. An older human man, his beard gray and his posture stooped with age, approached as they entered the valley. Welcome, travelers. We do not get many newcomers this far west. I am Aldrich, one of the settlement's founders. What brings you to Crossroads? Winston asked, pulling the wagon to a stop. That is what we call this place, Aldrich explained. Where different paths meet, where those who do not fit in the eastern lands can make a new start. His eyes took in Winston and Kira sitting together, and he smiled. Something tells me you might be looking for exactly that. Over the next several hours, Aldrich showed them around the settlement. Crossroads had been founded 15 years earlier by a group of exiles, both human and orc, who had been cast out or fled their respective communities. Some had committed crimes, others had simply violated social conventions, still others had been persecuted for their beliefs or choices. Here, they had built something new. "We have one rule," Aldrich said as they walked. "Your past does not matter. Human, orc, dwarf, we have even had an elf pass through once. What matters is whether you will contribute to the community and treat others with respect. Can you do that?" Winston looked at Kira, saw the hope dawning in her eyes. "Yes," he said firmly. "We can do that." They were given a small plot of land at the edge of the settlement, near where the forest met the cultivated fields. The previous owners had started building a cabin, but had moved on before completing it, leaving behind a structure with sound walls and roof, but no interior finishing. "It is perfect," Kira said, standing in the middle of the empty main room. "We can make this into a real home." Over the following weeks and months, they did exactly that. Winston used his merchant skills to trade with the settlement, exchanging the goods he still carried for building materials and supplies. Kira used her strength and craftsmanship to finish the cabin's interior, building furniture and making improvements that transformed the bare structure into something comfortable and welcoming. They also began integrating into the community. Winston discovered that his trade connections from his previous life were valuable even out here. He made arrangements to bring in goods from the east that the settlement needed, creating a new trading route focused on Crossroads. Kira joined hunting parties that kept the settlement supplied with meat, her skills quickly earning respect from both the orc and human hunters. But more than the work, they found something Winston had not even realized he was missing: acceptance. In Crossroads, no one stared at them when they walked hand in hand through the settlement. No one whispered or made crude comments. They were simply Winston and Kira, a couple like any other. Spring arrived, and with it came the full thaw. The valley burst into life with wildflowers and new green growth. Winston and Kira worked together to plant a garden behind their cabin, arguing good-naturedly about whether to prioritize vegetables or herbs. "We need food," Winston insisted, on his knees in the freshly turned earth. "We can hunt for food," Kira countered, "but good medicinal herbs are harder to find. What happens when someone in the settlement falls ill and needs treatment? You are just saying that because you want to avoid admitting you have no idea how to grow vegetables." Kira threw a clod of dirt at him, which he dodged, laughing. The playful argument dissolved into a kissing session that left them both covered in dirt and completely forgetting what they had been debating in the first place. It was during one warm evening in late spring that Winston decided to ask the question that had been building in his mind for weeks. They were sitting on the porch of their completed cabin, watching the sun set over the valley, when he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden carving. "I made this," he said, holding it out to Kira. "It is not much, but I wanted to give you something that represented well us." Kira took the carving carefully. It was a small wolf, no bigger than her thumb, carved from dark wood and polished smooth. But this wolf had a merchant's pack strapped to its back, a whimsical detail that made her smile. "A stone wolf turned merchant," she said softly. "Or a merchant who runs with wolves. It is perfect, Winston." "Kira," Winston said, his heart hammering so hard he could barely hear his own voice. "I know we do not follow traditional human or orc customs, but I want you to know that I choose you, not just for today or this season, but for all my days." I want to build this life with you, face whatever comes together, and wake up beside you every morning for the rest of my life. Will you, would you?" He was fumbling the words badly, but Kira understood anyway. She set the carving down carefully and took both his hands in hers. "Yes," she said simply, "to all of it. Yes." They were married a week later in a ceremony that blended human and orc traditions. Aldrich officiated, speaking words about the joining of two lives and two paths. Kira wore flowers in her hair, a concession to human tradition that she admitted actually looked quite beautiful. Winston wore a necklace made from wolf fangs that Kira had crafted, symbolizing her clan heritage even though she could no longer claim the name. The entire settlement attended, cheering as Winston and Kira exchanged vows they had written themselves. When Aldrich finally declared them married and they kissed, the sound of celebration echoed across the valley. The feast afterward lasted well into the night. Winston's attempts at traditional orc dancing were clumsy but enthusiastic, earning him good-natured teasing from the orc members of the community. Kira surprised everyone by singing a human ballad she had learned from Winston, her voice rough but heartfelt. As the celebration wound down and they finally retreated to their cabin, Winston pulled Kira close and kissed her properly for the first time as his wife. "Thank you," he whispered against her lips. "For what?" "For being trapped in a mine. For counting those 9 days. For making that tapping sound that led me to you. For being brave enough to choose this life, even when it meant leaving everything else behind." He cupped her face in his hands. "For choosing me." Kira smiled, that full, bright smile that transformed her entire face. "I would make the same choice 1,000 times over, even the mine collapse if it meant finding you at the end. Let us agree to skip the mine collapse in any hypothetical do-overs," Winston suggested. "But the rest? Yes, I would not change a single moment." They spent their wedding night wrapped in each other's arms, talking and laughing and planning the future they would build together. They spoke about expanding their cabin to accommodate the children they might have someday, children who would grow up knowing both human and orc heritage without shame. They talked about Winston's trade routes and how they could help Crossroads grow. They talked about Kira eventually teaching hunting to the settlement's younger generation, passing on her skills. But mostly they just held each other, marveling at the improbable path that had led them here. From a collapsed mine and 9 days of darkness to this bright future full of possibility, it seemed almost too wonderful to be real. Summer settled over Crossroads, bringing with it warm days and clear nights filled with stars. Winston's trading trips took him away occasionally, but never for long, and he always returned to find Kira waiting. She had fully integrated into the settlement now, her strength and skills making her invaluable for heavy labor, and her dry wit making her a favorite in the communal hall, where settlers gathered on cold evenings. One evening in midsummer, a messenger arrived from one of the nearest human settlements, a place called Millbrook, that Winston had traded with before. The message was simple but concerning. A large orc warband had been spotted moving through the territory, and all outlying settlements should be on alert. The news caused tension in Crossroads. While the settlement was mixed, the appearance of a warband could mean trouble regardless of their intentions. Aldrich called a town meeting to discuss preparations. "We should send scouts," one of the orc settlers suggested. "Determine if they are hostile or simply passing through." "We should fortify," a human farmer countered. "Build up our defenses in case they attack." The debate was growing heated when Kira stood up. "Let me go," she said quietly, and the room fell silent. "I can approach them without triggering an immediate attack. If they are one of the Western clans, they may be willing to talk. If they are raiders, I will see their intentions and return to warn you." "It is too dangerous," Winston said immediately. "What if they recognize you as Stone Wolf?" "What if I am the most qualified person here for this task?" Kira interrupted gently but firmly. "I can track them, assess their threat level, and return without being detected if necessary. You know I am right." Winston wanted to argue, wanted to forbid it, but he saw the determination in her eyes and knew it would be futile. More than that, he knew she was right. As much as he hated putting her in danger, she was the best choice for the mission. "Then I am coming with you," he said. "Winston, no arguments. If you are going to scout a potentially hostile warband, you are not doing it alone. We face things together, remember? That was the deal." Kira looked like she wanted to protest further, but something in Winston's expression must have convinced her. She nodded once, sharply. "Together, then." They left at dawn the next day, traveling light and moving quickly. Kira followed the scouts' reports to where the warband had been spotted, then used her tracking skills to pick up their trail. It led north and west, deeper into the mountains. "They are not raiding," Kira observed after a few hours of tracking. "See how they move. They are not stopping at any of the scattered homesteads we passed. They have a destination in mind." "That could be good or very bad," Winston pointed out. It took 2 days of careful tracking before they finally caught up to the warband. Kira had them approach from downwind, staying hidden in the tree line while they observed. What they saw was surprising. The warband was indeed large, perhaps 60 orcs, but they were accompanied by wagons full of goods and supplies. More of a migration than a raiding party. "They are refugees," Kira said quietly. "Look at how many children there are, how many elderly. Something has driven them from their territory." "Should we make contact?" Before Kira could answer, a voice called out from the warband's camp. "You, in the trees, show yourselves or we will assume hostile intent." Kira swore under her breath but stood up slowly, her hands visible and empty. Winston did the same, moving to stand beside her. They walked into the camp carefully, aware of the many weapons pointed in their direction. The warband's leader was a scarred orc woman who looked to be in her 50s, her dark hair streaked with gray. She studied Kira and Winston with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "You are far from clan land, sister," she said to Kira in the orcish language. Then, switching to human speech, "and traveling with a human as a companion, not a prisoner." "Interesting." "We come from a settlement nearby called Crossroads," Kira explained. "We heard reports of a warband moving through the territory and came to assess whether you posed a threat to our people." "Crossroads." The leader's expression shifted to something like hope. "I have heard whispers of that place. A mixed settlement where outcasts can find peace. Is it real?" "Very real," Winston said. "I live there with my wife," he gestured to Kira, "along with roughly 100 others, human, orc, and a few other folks who needed a fresh start." The leader's scarred face split into a grin that showed her prominent tusks. "Then perhaps our journey has not been in vain. We are the scattered remnants of 3 clans who were driven from our lands by human expansion in the east. We have been wandering for months, seeking a place where we might settle without constant conflict. But everywhere we go, we are met with hostility or land too poor to support us." Kira and Winston exchanged glances. "How many are you?" Kira asked. 63, last count." "We have warriors, yes, but also craftspeople, healers, farmers. We want only to live in peace and raise our children without fear." Winston made a decision. "Come to Crossroads. I cannot promise that the community will accept all of you immediately. That is not my decision to make. But I can promise that you will be heard fairly, and if you are willing to contribute and live by our rules, you will likely find a home." The leader, who introduced herself as Marga, looked like she might cry. You would do this for us, strangers, orcs. Crossroads was built by strangers helping strangers, Winston said. That is the entire point of the place. It took 3 days to guide Marga's people back to Crossroads. The settlement scouts spotted the large group approaching and initially sounded an alarm, but Winston and Kira rode ahead to explain the situation. Aldrich called another town meeting, this one even more contentious than the last. 60 more people, one settler protested. We do not have resources for that many. We will be stretched too thin. They have their own supplies, Kira pointed out, and skills we need. Marga tells me they have 2 blacksmiths, a talented weaver, and multiple experienced hunters. They can contribute immediately. But can we trust them? Someone else asked. How do we know this is not a trick? We do not, Aldrich said calmly. We never know for certain when we accept someone new. That has always been the risk of Crossroads, but it has also been our strength. Every person here came as a stranger once, and we chose to trust. The debate raged for hours. Finally, a vote was called. By a narrow margin, the community agreed to allow Marga's people to settle nearby, not in Crossroads proper initially, but in a sister settlement that they would help build. If after a year both groups felt comfortable, the 2 settlements could merge fully. It was not a perfect solution, but it was a start. Over the following months, Winston and Kira found themselves acting as liaisons between Crossroads and the new settlement, helping smooth communication and resolve disputes. It was exhausting work, but also deeply rewarding. By the time autumn arrived again, marking a full year since Winston had followed that faint tapping into the abandoned mine, the 2 settlements had grown close. The merger happened organically, with members of Marga's group moving into Crossroads and vice versa. The valley now held over 150 people, a thriving community that continued to grow. Winston stood on the porch of his cabin one cool evening, watching smoke rise from the many chimneys that now dotted the valley. Kira emerged from inside and wrapped her arms around him from behind, resting her chin on top of his head. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "About how different my life is from what I imagined a year ago," Winston said honestly. "I thought I would spend my whole life on the road, alone, chasing profits and freedom. I never dreamed I could have this, a home, a community. Do you regret it, giving up that life?" "Not for a single moment." He turned in her arms and kissed her softly. "Though I do occasionally miss the simplicity of just me and a wagon full of goods," Kira laughed. "If you want simple, you should not have married an orc woman with strong opinions and a talent for finding trouble." "You found the trouble," Winston protested. "I just followed some odd tapping sounds into an abandoned mine like a sensible person." "No sensible person follows mysterious tapping sounds into collapsed mines." "Well, no sensible person tracks a deer through a storm into said mine, so I think we are equally responsible for our situation." They were still bantering good-naturedly when Aldrich approached, a knowing smile on his weathered face. "Sorry to interrupt you too, but I wanted to let you know we are having a celebration next week. 1 year since Marga's people arrived, and we thought it would be good to mark the occasion." "That sounds wonderful," Kira said. "What can we do to help?" "Actually, I was hoping you might speak," Aldrich said. "About Crossroads, about what it means to build a home across cultural lines. You two represent that better than anyone." Winston looked at Kira, saw his own uncertainty reflected in her eyes. They were not particularly comfortable being held up as examples. They were just 2 people trying to make a life together. But they also understood the value of their story, how it might help others. "We will do it," Kira said finally. "Though you should know that Winston gets nervous speaking in front of crowds. He may need some encouragement." "I do not get nervous," Winston protested. "I just prefer my words in smaller doses." The celebration the following week was even larger than their wedding had been. People from both settlements gathered, sharing food and music and stories late into the night. When the time came for Winston and Kira to speak, they stood together before the assembled crowd, hands clasped. Kira spoke first, her voice strong and clear. "A year ago, I was dying alone in the dark. I had given up hope, resigned myself to an end that no one would witness and few would mourn. Then I heard a voice on the other side of the rocks, a human voice, speaking words of encouragement and determination. That voice belonged to someone who had every reason to leave me there, who would have been safer and smarter to walk away. But he did not." She squeezed Winston's hand. "Winston saved my life that day. But more than that, he showed me that the barriers we are taught exist between peoples are not as solid as we believe. That kindness and compassion are not limited by species or clan or tradition. That family can be chosen, not just inherited." Winston cleared his throat, trying to calm his hammering heart. "I am not very good with speeches, but I want to say that before I met Kira, I thought freedom meant being alone, being beholden to no one, responsible for nothing but my next sale and next destination. What I learned is that real freedom comes from choosing your connections, choosing your community, from finding people who accept you completely and building something meaningful together." He gestured around the valley. "That is what Crossroads represents. Not just a place on a map, but an idea that we can choose who we are to each other, regardless of what the outside world tells us we should be. Every person here has chosen to be part of this community, has chosen to see beyond difference to common humanity. Or common personhood, I suppose, since we are not all human." That earned a ripple of laughter. "The point is," Winston continued, "we all followed some version of that tapping into the dark. We all took a risk on something uncertain and possibly foolish, and look what we built because of it." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. As Winston and Kira returned to their seats, he felt Kira lean against him, her presence solid and warm and perfect. Winter came to Crossroads, bringing snow and cold but also a sense of cozy togetherness, as the community gathered in the large communal hall for meals and entertainment. Winston and Kira settled into a comfortable routine. He managed the settlement's trading operations while she taught hunting skills to the younger generation, and served on the council that helped govern the growing community. It was during a particularly fierce blizzard, when they were snowed into their cabin for 3 days straight, that Kira shared news that changed everything again. "I think I am pregnant," she said quietly, watching Winston's face carefully for his reaction. For a moment, Winston could not process the words. Then joy crashed over him like a wave. "You think? You are not certain as I can be. My mother was a healer, remember? She taught me the signs." Kira's hand drifted to her stomach in an unconsciously protective gesture. Is this something you want?" Winston crossed the cabin in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms. "Want? Kira, this is everything. Yes, I want this. I want a family with you. I want to teach our child to track and trade and laugh and be brave like their mother. And foolishly kind like their father," Kira added, but she was smiling through tears. Their daughter was born in early summer, during the season when the valley was at its most beautiful. The birth was difficult. Orc-human offspring were rare, and there were complications, but both Kira and the baby survived with help from the settlement's healers, both human and orc. They named her Eleanor, after Winston's grandmother. She had green-tinted skin, softer than her mother's but clearly not human, with tiny nubs on her jaw where small tusks would eventually grow. Her ears had slight points, and her eyes, when they finally opened, were a striking mix of Winston's blue and Kira's amber, a blue-green that seemed to change in different light. She is perfect, Winston whispered, holding his daughter for the first time with shaking hands. Absolutely perfect. She is going to be tall, Kira observed from the bed, exhausted but smiling. Look at those feet. Definitely got my genes there. Alina grew quickly, displaying the best traits of both her parents. She was strong like her mother but clever like her father, curious about everything and fearless in her exploration of the world. The entire settlement doted on her. She was the first child born in Crossroads who embodied both human and orc heritage so visibly, a living symbol of what the community stood for. As Alina took her first steps, spoke her first words, and began to develop her own personality, Winston and Kira watched with wonder and pride. They told her stories of both their cultures, taught her to value both halves of her heritage. They also told her, in age-appropriate ways, the story of how they met, how her father had followed mysterious tapping into a dangerous place because someone needed help, and how that choice had changed everything. "You were brave, Papa," Alina said one night as Winston tucked her into bed. She was 3 years old now, speaking in full sentences and asking endless questions. "I was scared," Winston corrected gently, "but I did it anyway. That is what bravery is, being scared and doing the right thing regardless. Like Mama choosing you even though it was hard." Winston smiled. His daughter was far too perceptive for her age. "Yes, exactly like that. Your Mama is the bravest person I know." Years continued to pass, each one bringing changes to Crossroads. The settlement grew to over 200 people. They built a proper school where children of all backgrounds learned together. They established more formal trade relationships with other settlements, both human and orc. Winston's trading operation expanded to include multiple wagons and employees, making Crossroads a vital hub for the Western Territories. Through it all, Winston and Kira remained at the heart of the community, not as leaders exactly, but as examples of what was possible when people chose compassion over fear. They were not perfect. They argued sometimes, struggled with the challenges of raising a child who belonged to two worlds, and dealt with the occasional prejudice from newcomers who needed time to adjust to Crossroads' philosophy. But they faced everything together, just as they had promised during those early days in the abandoned trapper's cabin. And every year, on the anniversary of the day Winston had followed that faint tapping into the mine, they would take a walk together to remember where they had started. 9 days in the dark, Kira would say, as she did every year. But only 1 day to decide to live, Winston would respond. And they would stand together, watching the sun set over the valley they had helped build, grateful beyond words for the series of improbable choices and fortunate accidents that had led them to this life. Their story became a legend in Crossroads and the surrounding territories, the tale of a human merchant who rescued an orc warrior from certain death, and the love that bloomed in the aftermath of tragedy. It was told around fires on cold nights, shared with newcomers as proof that bridges could be built between any two peoples if both were willing to take the risk. But for Winston and Kira, it was never a legend. It was simply their life, imperfect, challenging, but absolutely theirs. Built on a foundation of one person's choice to follow a mysterious sound into danger, to offer help to someone who the world said should be an enemy, to see beyond difference to the person beneath. And when Winston lay dying many decades later, surrounded by his children, grandchildren, and the community he had helped build, his last words were for Kira, who sat beside him holding his aged hand in hers. "Thank you," he whispered, "for tapping, for calling out, for choosing me." "Always," Kira whispered back, her eyes bright with tears. "In every life, in every world, I would choose you again. Winston smiled and closed his eyes, content. He had lived a life rich beyond anything he could have imagined that day in the mine. He had loved deeply, built something lasting, and left the world better than he found it. What more could any person ask for? Kira lived another 5 years after Winston's death, continuing to serve the community and teaching her grandchildren the hunting skills that had been passed down through generations. When she finally followed her husband to whatever lay beyond, the entire settlement mourned. They buried her beside Winston on the hill overlooking the valley, where the wind sang through the trees and the view stretched for miles. Alina, who had grown into a formidable leader in her own right, spoke at her mother's funeral. "My mother taught me that strength is not just about physical power. It is about having the courage to be vulnerable, to choose love even when it is difficult, to build instead of destroy. My father taught me that kindness is not weakness, but the strongest force in the world." Together, they showed all of us that family is not defined by blood or species, but by the choices we make to care for one another. She looked out over the assembled crowd, at the mixture of humans and orcs and others who had made Crossroads their home. This valley exists because two people refused to accept the limitations their worlds placed on them. Because one person followed a sound into danger, and another person had the courage to call for help. Let us honor their memory by continuing to build bridges, continuing to choose compassion, continuing to believe that love is stronger than fear. The community thrived for generations after, always remembering the merchant and the warrior whose unlikely love had planted the seeds of something revolutionary. And on quiet nights when the wind blew just right through the valley, people swore they could hear it, a faint, rhythmic tapping, 3 beats and a pause. Not a call for help anymore, but a reminder. A reminder that sometimes the most important choices we make are the ones that seem foolish at the time. That following mysterious sounds into dark places can lead to light. That reaching across divides, whether cultural or physical, is how we find our truest selves and build our best futures. That 9 days in the dark is a long time to count, but only one moment is needed to decide that hope, connection, and love are worth the risk. Always.